One of the Beverly Hills pot mums who I interviewed on Friday, they use cannabis because it makes them better parents, they claim, and deals with pain and anxiety and so on. They and many others want pot to be legalised. But should it be? That's what we're talking about in our series Gone to Pot, America's Marijuana Obsession. With me now is former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, co-founder of One Mind for Research. Also Kevin Sabet, he's the director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida and the author of Reefer Sanity. And Neil Franklin, retired police major and executive director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, or LEAP, and Dr. Drew Pinsky. Stay with me, because why would I get rid of you over such a contentious issue as this?
By the way, I thought Nancy Grace had it going with Tot Mom, but Pot Mom.
Pot Mom.
Now you're really on.
Pot Mums. Patrick Kennedy, we start with you, because you, at one stage in your life, were in support of legalising marijuana for medical purposes. Now you've changed your mind. Why?
Well, because I found out the facts, and the facts are, my initial thinking was like most Americans. I didn't think it was any big deal. Frankly, I thought people who had cancer, some medical need, every member of my family has had cancer, so I wouldn't begrudge them using something to mitigate the effects of chemotherapy, for example. But then I saw, from looking at it further, and I was asked to be on the National Institutes of Drug Abuse Board with Nora Volkow, and I really learned the science, Piers. And when I learned the truth about the impact of us going down this road towards legalization, it really occurred to me that my original position was wrong. And I hope that anybody who has a position, if they see the facts and they see that they were wrong, they will admit it. I admit it. I was wrong to initially think that there was something harmless about medical marijuana, because now what I've seen is that there is a commercial industry behind this medical marijuana, soon to be moving down the track, as it has in Washington, Colorado, to become fully legalized. And I worry that my fight has been for mental health and against addiction and trying to treat addiction, but the best way to treat addiction is prevention. And what I really worry about with this reducing the kind of harm, perception of harm of marijuana, which is what's really out there now thanks to all this movement towards legalization, that more people will use, Piers. And if more people use like I did when I was a teenager, 9 out of 10 addicts, which I became, started when they were teenagers. And no one can argue to me that this move will increase the number of young people who will end up using this because they don't think it's any big deal because of this notion that it's medical. And I think that's a dangerous notion.
Let me bring in Dr. Drew here, because we did this show on Friday. I find it fascinating, the arguments for and against. Sanjay Gupta, seen as a very respected medical guy, he's very firmly, look, there's no evidence that he's seen that marijuana is any more harmful than alcohol or tobacco. And on that basis, why should it be treated differently?
But that's a bizarre argument. To me, that's where the rubber hits the road on all this stuff, was that, well, if you want to look at a bad drug, the drugs have the most serious impact on the health of this country. A bad drug, alcohol and cigarettes are bad drugs. Now, the fact that they're legal doesn't make them any less good, any more good. They're still bad. So the question is, do we want to throw another one into that could be causing
unless you're prepared, though, as a country, Kevin, to outlaw all cannabis, or alcohol, or tobacco.
Or legalize everything.
Or legalize everything. I mean, to me, I remember, I touched on this on Friday, but, when I broke a few ribs, I remember getting, not addicted, but I think you would call it dependent, within 4 or 5 weeks, because of the excruciating pain, to both Vicodin, which I took for the pain, and Ambien, for which I was trying to use to sleep.
And by the way, in terms of people dying in this country right now, those classes of drugs are the ones that are killing
those are
people.
legal.
I was stunned by the power of these.
Doesn't make them bad drugs, though. If you had cancer, they'd be good drugs.
Exactly right. But my point is, no one can tell me from what I experienced then that marijuana in controlled doses, potentially legalized, and therefore the actual substance is not being cut with anything unpleasant, is any more harmful than those were. Probably a lot less.
But Piers, consistency isn't the highest virtue of public policy. I think Drew makes a good point that alcohol and tobacco are actually horrific examples, and I talk about this in Reefer Sanity, that the legality of those two drugs is no argument for marijuana to be legal. Actually, it's an argument to keep marijuana illegal. We have big tobacco right now and the liquor lobby. I worked in Washington. We saw their influence. They target kids. Frankly, they target minorities. They make sure that they go after the ones that are addicted.
Are those limbs or those organizations going to pick up cannabis?
Well, that's the issue. There's already evidence that they will.
Dr. Drew has already removed from my life anything yummy. The scones have had to go, right?
Look,
now you want to take away my cigar that I have every 3 months? You want to take away my Chateau Latour that I like to drink of an evening? What am I left with?
I didn't say that. Listen,
you're bong.
Listen, alcohol has a long history of widespread accepted use in our culture, dating back to before the Old Testament. Marijuana does not have that kind of widespread history. So I don't see why just because alcohol is legal, marijuana will be. I could care less if those marijuana moms who are net worth a couple $1 million are smoking marijuana on the weekdays. This isn't about them. This is actually about kids, people vulnerable for addiction. 1 in 6 kids who try pot will become addicted. You see them every day in your treatment.
We see a lot of marijuana addiction. We also see that one thing we didn't know is that the effects, long-term effects on the developing brain, are much more substantial than I ever thought. The research has shown.
And also,
but they're not going to listen. They're not going to legalize it for under 18, though. That's not.
No, they're not. But alcohol and tobacco are much more accessible.
Sanjay Gupta made the point. Right, Sanjay Gupta made the point that actually below 25 years of age, before the brain is completely fully formed, it can be more harmful.
That's right.
Most definitely. IQ is huge. The long-term impact on IQ.
Well, I've heard from you 3 killjoys. So after the break, we're going to come back with Neil Franklin, who will put the case for the defense of legalizing marijuana. I'll be with you, don't worry. Back now with the heated debate over legalising pot. With me again are Patrick Kennedy, Kevin Sabet, Neil Franklin and Dr. Drew Pinsky. Now, let's turn to Neil Franklin, because you spent 34 years on the front line fighting the war on drugs. Did it work, and are you in favour of legalising cannabis?
Piers, obviously it did not work, and it's not working now. Look, law enforcement against prohibition, nor I, are part of some huge conglomerate that wants to legalize pot for money. We are a group of volunteers, thousands of volunteers. We have spent our careers on the front lines of the war on drugs. We have decimated communities, mainly poor communities and black communities. And it's time for a change. Don't get me wrong. I feel for what Mr. Sabet and Mr. Kennedy are saying. Obviously, it's more effective to educate and to treat in reducing drug use. Look what we've done with tobacco over the past couple of decades. We reduced it by consumption by about 40%. We're not sending anyone to prison. We're not shooting each other in the streets. And let me talk about prison right now. Our families in the black community have been devastated. 1 in 9, that's the number of black children with parents in prison, compared to 1 in 57 for white children. When you look back over the decades, the law enforcement community has exercised these prohibition policies. We've enforced these prohibition policies mainly in poor communities and communities of color. And whether that's by design or whether it's by happenstance, the fact of the matter is that it does exist, and it hasn't changed, and it won't change. I'd be curious to find out how, Mr. Kennedy, how prison helped you beat addiction.
Well, let's ask Patrick Kennedy. Answer that very question.
Let me thank you, Neil, for your service as a law enforcement officer, and agree with you that the war on drugs has become a war on people. I was the author of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. As you know, Neil, we need to treat this as a public health crisis, not a criminal justice issue. And I salute you for your debate and bringing this forward. But as you know, Neil, the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry target minority communities. And to think that if we give the commercial power of big marijuana to these companies, that they're not going to target members of your community with the same aggressive marketing that they have with tobacco and alcohol, I think is something that ignores the facts. Now, I agree with you. We need to change our policy. But it's not a lock them up or light them up approach. We need an approach that's based upon the public health. And let me bring in Kevin.
Okay, chaps, let me just bring in Kevin first of all, because you have to weigh
more than prison.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Neil. Right. Kevin, this is the nub of this, isn't it? At the moment, it's a massive drain on America financially because of putting all these people in prison completely unnecessarily, ruining families, ruining lives and so on, and huge expense. weighed against the power of brand marijuana and what we know will happen if it's legalized.
Well, we don't have
which is less harmful to America's national interest.
The good news is those aren't our two only options, because those are both harmful. We have a lot of other options. We need to invest much more in treatment, much more in drug courts. By the way, drug courts are things that actually happen within the criminal justice system. They get people successfully off that are addicted. Early and brief interventions. Right now, doctors, physicians are not trained in addiction, and less than a third of our medical schools get 2 weeks of training on addiction, yet we're saying we want to call this a health issue. Let's actually call it a health issue and try these health interventions first before we potentially go to something that's irreversible and that will have damage. So the good news is our two options are not legalized, and they're also not lock them up. I agree with Neil on incarceration. We need to reduce incarceration. The best way to do that is treatment and prevention, not legalization.
I mean, I'm sort of with you, Drew, just to wrap up, because I'm slightly on the fence about this, but I'm lending myself more to legalizing simply because I think it's better than the alternative.
We'll find out in Washington, Colorado, what the implications are. We'll be studying it carefully.
Dr. Drew, Patrick Kennedy, Kevin Sabet, and Neil Franklin, thank you all very much. We're going to keep going with this on this show, so we will have you all back and debate it all over again, because it's something everyone in America is talking about. And we'll be right back after this break.